A mother-in-law's hatred is a poison that seeps slow, but Constance skipped the slow part entirely. She hauled her own son's wife to the flesh peddlers in the dead heart of winter, sold the woman she'd branded sterile and broken for 30 silver coins and a cleared path toward fresh, fertile blood for her pack. Locked inside a rusted iron cage, Adelaide waited for a life of frozen, brutal servitude. But fate and the moon goddess have a cruel taste for irony. The man who shattered that auction block was no slaver. He was the Alpha King. The stone walls of Winterfell Keep held no warmth, only a damp, gnawing cold that burrowed into bone and settled there like grief. For Adelaide, that chill ran deeper than winter in the northern territories. It was the exact temperature of her marriage. 3 years she had been mated to Rowan, future alpha of the Silvermoon Pack. At 18, she'd been bright-eyed and fierce, tightly bonded to her wolf, Phelan. By 21, she was a spectre drifting through her own existence. Her unforgivable sin? An empty womb. In a medieval werewolf world where a Luna's sole worth was measured in the heirs she produced, Adelaide was destitute. __quote_0___. Constance's voice scraped like millstones. Adelaide stared down at the dark, sludgy liquid hissing inside the wooden goblet. Constance, Rowan's mother, the ruling Luna, loomed above her. A woman sculpted from frost and malice, silver-threaded hair wrenched back so tight it tugged the corners of her sharp, appraising eyes. Adelaide's hands shook as she raised the cup. The stench hit first, bitter char, decomposing leaves, and something acrid underneath that made Phelan whine and retreat to the farthest, darkest hollow of her mind. Ever since Constance had begun these treatments a year ago, Adelaide's bond with her wolf had grown terrifyingly faint. She could no longer shift. She could barely sense her own strength. She choked the liquid down. It scorched her throat like swallowed embers. __quote_2___. Constance ripped the goblet from her fingers. Adelaide's voice came out raw, barely a whisper. Rowan and I. Do not speak his name as though you stand beside him. Constance cracked the goblet against the heavy oak table. Rowan needs an heir. Lady Genevieve, daughter of House Sterling, has come of age. She is strong. She is fertile. She carries a dowry of 50 warhorses. And you? You delivered nothing but a pretty face, and even that is crumbling under the weight of your own failure. Adelaide forced the knot in her throat down. Her gaze drifted past Constance, searching for Rowan, praying her mate would walk through those doors and defend her, just once. But Rowan was a coward, wrapped in a warrior's frame. He'd been avoiding her eyes for weeks, spending his hours in the training yards in the company of the visiting Lady Genevieve, anywhere but their shared chambers. That evening, the degradation found its summit. The great hall overflowed for the winter solstice feast, hundreds of wolves ripping into roasted haunches, gulping heavy ale. Adelaide sat rigid beside Rowan. Constance rose at the head of the table and struck her silver goblet. The hall fell still. My wolves! Constance's voice bounced off the vaulted stone above. __quote_9___. Her razor gaze swung to Adelaide. The silence pressed in like a hand over the mouth. __quote_10___. A collective gasp tore through the hall. To address a mate's fertility in the open was the deepest taboo, a humiliation reserved for banished omegas. Adelaide's heart slammed against her ribs. She turned to Rowan. The plea scraped through their fractured mind link. Rowan fixed his eyes on his plate, his jaw locked tight. He said nothing. He didn't so much as extend a hand toward hers. In that crushing silence, Adelaide understood something she'd been refusing to see. Her marriage wasn't merely cold, it was a corpse. A wolf without a pack. That is grief. A wolf abandoned by her own mate while seated right beside him. That is death with a pulse. She excused herself from the hall, fleeing through corridors thick with mocking whispers. In her chambers, she stuffed a small satchel with shaking hands. Tears burned hot and furious down her cheeks. She had no destination. She only knew she couldn't survive another hour of this. But Constance was already 10 steps ahead. Before dawn had even touched the snow-capped peaks, 2 burly guards shook Adelaide awake. One grunted. Confused, still half in a dream, Adelaide pulled on her heaviest wool dress and a thick fur-lined cloak. The courtyard hit her like a wall of ice. Constance stood beside a large unmarked carriage, iron-wrought and windowless. __quote _15 ___. Adelaide's breath ghosted white in the frozen air. My son is hunting. The lie slid from Constance's mouth like silk. __quote _17 ___. Every instinct Adelaide possessed screamed. Deep beneath the herbal fog, Phelan clawed weakly at the walls of her mind. Danger. But refusing a direct order from the reigning Luna was treason. Adelaide climbed into the carriage. Constance followed, face carved from stone. 4 hours they rode in suffocating silence. The carriage jolted and pitched over frozen, rutted roads, each mile dragging them further from Silvermoon territory, deeper into the lawless expanse known as the Grey Wastes. Then the carriage ground to a halt. Adelaide pressed her face to the small barred window. A dead forest, skeletal trees. In the clearing ahead sat a caravan of enclosed wagons, surrounded by rough men and scarred wolves. The stench hit her first. Old blood, unwashed bodies, despair. At the head of the caravan stood Lord Morvan, a notorious flesh peddler, a rogue wolf who'd built his fortune capturing and selling exiled wolves, humans, and omegas to underground markets. What is this? Adelaide's voice cracked as she turned to Constance. Constance said nothing. She pushed the carriage door open and stepped into the snow. Rough hands seized Adelaide's arms, dragging her from the carriage. She fought, kicked, thrashed, bit at the air, but her body was weak, her wolf crushed into silence. They threw her to her knees in the snow before Morvan. Ah, that smile, rotting teeth behind cracked lips. The Silvermoon Princess. You said she was pretty, Constance. You didn't mention she was beautiful. Her beauty is useless, Constance spat, producing a heavy leather pouch from beneath her cloak. She is barren. 3 years without a single swelling of the belly. A drain on our resources, an insult to my son. I want her gone, taken far from the north. Adelaide's blood turned to ice. The truth of it crashed over her like a mountainside collapsing. The words scraped from her throat. She stared up at Constance. A harsh, barking laugh cracked the frozen air. Constance reached into her sleeve. The rolled parchment bore the royal seal of Silvermoon, and beneath it, Rowan's unmistakable signature. He knew. He had always known. Rowan had traded her away like livestock to make room for Genevieve. The betrayal struck harder than any blade ever could. It shattered something deep inside her chest, and in the ruins of that broken heart, the mate bond snapped clean. Adelaide screamed, raw, agonized, the sound of a soul torn in two. Morvan tossed a smaller pouch of coins toward Constance. 30 pieces of silver as agreed. Sterile female. She'll fetch a fair price as a scullery maid, or a bed warmer for some lesser rogue. Nothing more. Just ensure she never returns. Constance's voice was ice. She turned her back on Adelaide and climbed into the carriage without a single glance behind her. __quote _31 __. Adelaide sobbed, wrenching against the guards. But the carriage was already rolling away, leaving her kneeling in the snow. Morvan seized her jaw, wrenching her face toward the torchlight. Ice-cold cuffs slammed around Adelaide's wrists. Wolfsbane laced the metal. It seared into her skin on contact, severing every last thread binding her to Phelan. Guards hauled her to the back of a massive wooden wagon and hurled her into a rusted cage. A week on the road. 7 days of hell. Adelaide survived on mouthfuls of stagnant water and crusts of bread gone hard as stone. Frost gnawed at her exposed flesh. The wolfsbane cuffs ate into her wrists, raw, weeping, festering. Around her, the other captives pressed together for warmth. Human peasants, rogue omegas, all of them with the same hollow, dead-eyed stare. Adelaide stopped speaking, stopped weeping after day 2. Something worse than grief settled over her, a cold, blank nothing. She had been a noblewoman, a Luna in training, a devoted mate. Now she was cargo, merchandise, broken by the very hands that would profit from her ruin. On the 7th morning, the wind carried something new, wood smoke, roasting meat, the stench of thousands of bodies packed together. The caravan ground to a halt. "On your feet, filth!" Morvan's iron rod crashed against the bars. __quote _34 Frostgate. The black market of the wolf world. Adelaide shut her eyes, drew one slow breath, braced for the final fall. The place was a sprawling wound carved into the bones of an ancient, crumbled fortress. Tents sagged between broken walls. Wooden stages lined muddy paths churned to muck. Morality didn't just bend here, it rotted. Mercenaries prowled the stalls beside rogue alphas and disgraced lords. Stolen blades changed hands next to forbidden potions. And slaves. Always slaves. They dragged Adelaide from the cage. Her legs buckled beneath her. Filth caked her skin. Her golden hair hung in matted ropes. The remnants of her dress barely clung to her frame. Everything that had once made her shine had been ground to dust. Morvan's men shackled her into a coffle with a dozen other women. They marched toward the grand auction block at the heart of the ruins. The crowd pressed close, jeering, whistling, appraising. Adelaide fixed her gaze on the mud under her bare feet. Then something changed. The drunken howling dimmed. Voices dropped to whispers, then silence. The air thickened, dense, crushing, saturated with dominance so raw it pressed against the chest like a fist. The fine hairs on Adelaide's arms rose. Even through the wolfsbane strangling fog, deep inside the darkest part of her, Phelan stirred. One thought cut through the haze like a blade. Alpha. No, not just an alpha king. Adelaide dragged her head upward. The crowd split apart like water before the prow of a warship. Through the gap marched a column of massive, heavily armored warriors. Dark forged steel encased their bodies. Thick direwolf pelts hung from their shoulders. And at the center, mounted on a warhorse black as a starless sky, him, King Gideon of the Ironblood Pack. His name was the story mothers told to silence disobedient pups. He had crushed the Eastern Territories before his 25th winter, ruthless, brilliant, a savagery in battle that men called demonic. He dismounted, and the crowd forgot to breathe. Gideon was terrifying and beautiful. He towered past 6 feet, shoulders wide and brutal beneath dark leather. His hair fell raven black, his eyes burned molten gold, sweeping the market with a predator's lazy contempt. A jagged scar crossed the bridge of his nose, the single flaw on an otherwise carved stone face. What is the Ironblood King doing at Frostgate? A trembling Omega beside Adelaide barely mouthed the words. His council demands a Luna, another whispered back. He's refused every noble woman they've sent. Came here hunting hidden warriors instead. Gideon and his beta Silas claimed position near the auction block's front edge. Lesser lords shrank back without being told. The auction commenced. Morven mounted the wooden stage, nearly shaking with greed at the sight of a king among his buyers. Captives were paraded one by one. Their uses, their strengths, shouted to the crowd. Bids rang out in silver and gold. Morven bellowed, gesturing sharply to his guards. The guards wrenched Adelaide's chains, hauling her forward. She staggered up the wooden steps and crashed to her knees on the splintered planks. The crowd stirred, taking in her swollen face, the aristocratic bones beneath the ruin. She has beauty, yes, Morvan projected, sweeping one arm wide. But I will not deceive my honest buyers. She is sold as cheap labor. Her womb is barren. 3 years mated, and she yielded no fruit. Sterile, broken, unranked. Bidding starts at a mere 10 copper pieces. The degradation was total. Laughter burst from a cluster of merchants near the front. To be declared barren before hundreds of wolves, that was a destruction deeper than death. Adelaide clenched her eyes shut, praying the boards beneath her would split apart and drag her down. 15 copper, a toothless innkeeper hollered. She can scrub my floors. 20, a greasy-looking rogue called out. Pretty enough for my bed, barren or not. Then a scent struck her, overpowering, intoxicating. Pine needles, razor-sharp winter air, and the metallic bite of blood. It ripped through her system, slicing clean past the wolfsbane that poisoned her veins. Deep inside her mind, Phelan threw her head back and released a howl that shook Adelaide's skull. __quote _46 __. Adelaide's eyes snapped open on a gasp. In that exact heartbeat, King Gideon went rigid. He had been turning away, entirely disinterested in the auction, when his massive frame locked mid-step. Every muscle tensed at once. His golden eyes cut toward the stage and found Adelaide. The air in the courtyard shattered with sudden explosive pressure. Gideon's pupils swallowed the gold until his eyes were nearly black. The raw weight of his aura crashed over the crowd, buckling weaker wolves to their knees. __quote _47 __, some merchant called, blind to the shifting tide. Gideon moved, not walked, stalked, a predator closing distance on its prey. Silas, his beater, stiffened with alarm. __quote _48 __. Gideon didn't acknowledge him. He reached the stage's edge and towered over Morvan. The flesh peddler trembled visibly, sweat rolling down his face beneath the Alpha King's killing gaze. My king, Morvan stammered. Do you wish to place a bid on this barren creature? Gideon never looked at him. His eyes devoured only Adelaide. He saw past the filth, past the bruises, past the rusted iron biting into her wrists. He saw the way her body shook. And from deep within his chest rose a growl so low it vibrated through the wood of the stage itself, a sound that turned blood cold. She is not barren. Gideon's voice was dark, a lethal purr that carried across the silent courtyard. Morvan stumbled backward, palms raised, the sentence never finished. Gideon vaulted onto the stage with impossible speed, bypassed the slaver entirely, and dropped to his knees before Adelaide. The crowd stopped breathing. The most feared man in the known world, kneeling in mud and filth for a discarded, disgraced, cast-off wife. Gideon reached out. His massive, calloused hands closed gently around the heavy iron cuffs on her wrists. He didn't search for a key. One savage flex of his arms, The metal groaned, shrieked, and shattered apart. Adelaide gasped as the wolfsbane's burn vanished from her skin. She looked up. Tear-filled blue eyes met molten gold. Gideon reached behind his neck and unclasped the heavy black direwolf fur cloak from his shoulders. He drew it around Adelaide's trembling frame, pulling her flush against the heat of his chest. Then he stood, lifting her into his arms as though she weighed nothing at all. He turned to the stunned crowd, fangs descended, eyes blazing with unrestrained possessive fury. "She is not for sale," the Alpha King's voice cracked off the ruins of Frostgate like thunder. __quote _55 _____. The journey from Frostgate to the Ironblood territories passed in a blur of speed, violence, and overwhelming sensation for Adelaide. The instant Gideon's declaration left his mouth, the market had erupted into chaos. Lord Morven, realizing he had enslaved the fated mate of the Alpha King, bolted. He never reached the edge of the ruins. At a single silent nod from Gideon, Silas and 2 Ironblood warriors cut him off. Morvan's end, short, brutal, finished, rang out behind them as Gideon lifted Adelaide onto his warhorse. For 3 days they drove east without mercy. Adelaide spent most of that journey bundled in Gideon's massive direwolf fur cloak, pressed tight against his chest. His heat seeped into her frozen, beaten body like a narcotic. The scent of him, pine, cold mountain air, and beneath it all that metallic edge of raw dominance, smoothed the jagged wounds inside her, even while her mind shrieked warnings about the creature who held her. Gideon barely spoke on the ride. His orders came through sharp gestures and low growls directed at his warriors. But with Adelaide, something shifted. When they stopped to rest, he fed her broth and watered wine with his own hands. Those massive, scarred fingers moved with surgical precision, careful not to add a single bruise to the ones she already wore. He never asked. Never explained. He simply seized control of her survival. On the 3rd afternoon, the jagged fangs of the Iron Mountains rose before them. Carved high into a sheer cliff face sat the Ironblood stronghold, the Iron Citadel. Black volcanic stone fused with reinforced iron. Not a single line built for beauty. Every wall, every turret screamed war. Cold, unyielding, terrifying, a perfect mirror of its king. As they passed through the iron gates, thousands of wolves pressed in to watch their alpha return, carrying a woman in his arms. The mind link exploded. Curiosity, suspicion, open hostility crashing together like a storm. Gideon ignored it all. He didn't parade her through the Great Hall. He carried her straight to the royal quarters in the highest tower, clearing every servant except one weathered old woman called Martha. His command dropped like a stone as he laid Adelaide on a vast bed heaped with furs. He turned to go. And Adelaide, seized by a bolt of raw panic at being abandoned in this cold, strange fortress, grabbed his sleeve. Her fingers had no strength. Her nails were broken and ragged. Gideon stopped. His gaze dropped to her hand, gripping the dark leather of his arm, then rose to meet her eyes. That molten gold had cooled. Something unreadable burned behind it now. The words scraped out of her throat like broken glass. Gideon answered, his voice a deep, low rumble. A pause. It was no reassurance. It was a king's oath sworn to his mate. He peeled her fingers free with impossible gentleness and strode from the room. The heavy oak door sealed shut behind him. Martha moved fast. Kind eyes, blunt manner, no wasted motion. She lowered Adelaide into steaming water thick with lavender and healing herbs, scrubbing away the grime of the road and the slave market with firm, careful hands. When the cloth pulled back to reveal the deep, festering chemical burns circling Adelaide's wrists, wolfsbane damage, raw and weeping. Martha sucked in a furious breath. She spat. Once bathed, Adelaide was wrapped in a soft green wool tunic and eased back onto the furs. Mother Beatrice arrived shortly after, ancient, the pack's chief healer, her face carved deep with wrinkles, but her eyes cutting as glass. She examined the burns first, pressing a cool, sharp-smelling salve into the wounds. Then she laid both hands flat on Adelaide's abdomen, closed her eyes. She stayed like that for a long time, her brow creased deeper with every passing moment. Inside Adelaide's mind, Phelan stirred, still weak without the iron's grip, but restless, uneasy. Beatrice said at last, her eyes opening. Beatrice's face went dark. "A witch's brew. I thought I could smell the taint." Her voice dropped lower. "Child, that was no fertility draught. It was a suppression tincture, potent, deliberate, laced with trace amounts of moonshade, a poison that slowly severs the bond between a wolf and her human host. It mimics true barrenness, and given enough time, it kills." The room tilted beneath Adelaide, the full shape of the horror locked into place. Constance hadn't merely hated her. She had been killing Adelaide slowly, day after day, dose after dose, while branding her the defective one. Adelaide's voice cracked, her heart slamming against bone. Beatrice gathered both her hands, held them firm. "No, child, you are not. And if your wolf recovers fully, you may face the opposite problem entirely. The moon goddess does not bind an alpha king to a shattered mate. What Gideon feels is real. The potential for life inside you is vast." She paused. "But the road to healing, that will be long." Adelaide sank into the pillows. Tears slid down her temples into her hair. Too much. All of it, too much. The depth of the betrayal behind her, the crushing weight of the future ahead. She was the Ironblood King's fated mate. She was not broken. She had simply been destroyed on purpose. The Ironblood Council was furious. Gideon occupied the head of the long obsidian table, letting his elders and ranking warriors hurl their objections into the charged air. Tension coiled through the chamber like a living thing. __quote_74__. Commander Caden bellowed, a scarred warrior who measured everything by strength alone. His lip curled. Silas cut in, his tone measured. Caden fired back, his fist cracking against the table. Gideon let their noise roll over him like distant thunder. His aura stayed leashed, but something dark and patient moved behind his eyes. He allowed them to speak, allowed the fear to empty itself. 2 words, barely above a whisper. The room died. That quiet voice carried more violence than any roar ever could. He rose to his full height, towering over every wolf at the table. __quote_82__. His gaze swept the table like a blade. __quote_83__. Not a soul stirred. Even Caden dropped his eyes, swallowing whatever pride remained. Gideon's wrath was not a thing any wolf provoked twice. "The coronation and mating ceremony will fall on the next full moon," Gideon declared. "Prepare the citadel. Neighboring packs will be summoned to witness the union." "My king," Caden ventured, lifting his gaze just barely. "Silvermoon. They must learn that the daughter they discarded now sits as queen of the Ironblood." A razor-thin smile crossed Gideon's mouth. Cold. Deliberate. __quote_88__. Silas bowed low, a sharp gleam in his eye. __quote_89__. While political storms gathered below, Adelaide spent the following week healing under Martha and Beatrice's unyielding care. The wolf's bane drained from her blood. The burns circling her wrists closed slowly, leaving thin silver scars behind like pale bracelets. Day by day, her bond with Phelan strengthened. She could shift again, running through the enclosed royal gardens, wind threading through her fur for the first time in a year. But the wounds beneath the skin ran deeper. Rowan's silent treachery and Constance's measured cruelty stalked her through every dream. And then there was Gideon. He came to her room each evening. He would settle into the armchair beside the fire, reading dispatches or honing his weapons while she lay on the bed. He never pushed conversation, never reached for the physical rights the mate bond entitled him to. Yet his presence filled the room completely, weight and warmth and silent invitation, all braided into one. "You don't know me," Adelaide said one night, watching firelight trace the scars across his jaw. Gideon stilled the dagger against the whetstone. "I know your scent. I know the rhythm of your heartbeat. I know the sound your soul makes when it calls to mine." He met her eyes. "The rest is detail, Adelaide. Details we have a lifetime to discover." "They hate me," she whispered. "Your people." A breath. "They believe I am weak, barren." Gideon's golden eyes locked onto hers, burning with sudden, fierce heat. __quote _96 __. Adelaide gave a silent nod. Gideon rose and crossed to the bed, dropping to one knee so their gazes set level. __quote _97 __. His hand reached out, hovering over hers, waiting. Adelaide slipped her fingers beneath his. The mate bond sparked on contact, a jolt of warmth and electricity flooding her blood. "Quote 98, quote," Gideon murmured. "Quote 99, quote." That chance arrived ahead of schedule. 3 days before the full moon, Gideon convened formal court in the Great Hall. Hundreds packed the chamber. Ironblood warriors, elders, nobility, artisans. Adelaide was seated on a smaller throne beside Gideon's massive obsidian seat. Her gown was heavy dark blue velvet, high-necked to conceal any lingering bruises. Her hair wound in intricate braids, minimal jewelry. Inside, she trembled. But she held her chin high, summoning every lesson from her lunar training years ago. Reports filled the session. Trade routes, border skirmishes, winter storms closing mountain passes. Adelaide sat in silence, reading the rigid hierarchy. She catalogued the veiled hostility from noblewomen who had once dreamed of claiming Gideon for themselves. Near the session's end, Lady Bryony stepped forward, Caden's sister, a formidable warrior in her own right. Beautiful in a sharp, blade-edged way, and she fixed Adelaide with undisguised contempt. "Your Grace," Bryony addressed Gideon, though her stare never left Adelaide. "The women of the Ironblood are known for their strength. We breed alphas. We hunt alongside our packs. Your mother, our previous Luna, could best 3 alphas in combat at once. We fear, my king, that the pack will soften under a less capable Luna." Agreement rippled through the hall. Bryony had pressed a raw nerve. Gideon's jaw locked tight. Bryony replied, smooth venom wrapped in silk. The counterfeit smile. These trap was elegant, passive-aggressive, built on every rumour of Adelaide's weakened bond to her wolf. Refusal would confirm their suspicions. Failure would mean public humiliation. Gideon drew breath to roar his dismissal, but Adelaide stood first. The hall went dead silent. She descended from the dais, walking past Bryony, and stopped in the centre of the room. Every eye bore down on her. She felt the crushing weight of their judgment. Constance's voice hissing, __quote _106 __, Rowan staring at his plate. The anger, the grief, the hunger for justice, all of it had been simmering for months. Now it boiled over. "Quote 107, quote," she called inward. "Quote 108, quote. Quote 109, quote," Phelan answered. Her voice was stronger than it had ever been, trembling with possessive fury. Adelaide closed her eyes, drew one long breath. She pulled from the primal heat of the mate bond, the ancient warmth of the iron citadel, and the bedrock of her own survival. Then she opened her mouth and unleashed a howl. Not the thin, reedy cry of a northern wolf. This was something raw, primordial, a sound that tore through the hall like a blade through parchment. It carried the cracking pressure of a winter storm, the bottomless grief of betrayal, and the lethal, sovereign power of a queen staking her claim. The stones of the fortress vibrated beneath it. The response was instant. Wolves across the hall gasped and staggered under the weight of her aura. Weaker wolves collapsed to their knees, their inner beasts bowing to the dominance in that sound. Even Silas and Caden stood frozen, eyes wide with shock. Adelaide let the call fade. She opened her eyes. The golden light of the mate bond faded from her blue eyes. She locked her gaze on Lady Bryony. Adelaide's voice rang clean across the silent hall. "But my wolf is far from broken. I am the fated mate of the Ironblood King, and I will not be tested by his subjects." She turned, climbed the dais, and took her seat beside Gideon. Silence held the room for one breathless moment. Then the warriors erupted. A roar of approval shook the rafters. This was a pack that worshipped raw power, and they had just witnessed it bare its teeth. Gideon leaned back on his throne, golden eyes blazing with pride and possession. He said nothing. He reached for Adelaide's hand, threaded his fingers through hers. A public claim. Her first victory, sealed before every witness in the hall. The broken northern bride was dead. The queen of the Ironblood had arrived. The road to the Ironblood Keep punished every mile, but for Constance, the Dowager Luna of Silvermoon, each jolt of the carriage tasted like triumph. She sat within her velvet-lined coach beside her son Rowan and his new, heavily pregnant mate, Genevieve of House Sterling. Satisfaction curled through her like smoke. Every piece of her family's destiny arranged by her own hand. "Straighten your spine, Rowan," Constance snapped, pulling her ermine cloak tighter against the savage cold of the Iron Mountains. "King Gideon does not respect slouching. He is a conqueror. We are here to pledge fealty, present Genevieve's dowry gifts, and secure a trade alliance. Do not look like a frightened pup." Rowan shifted. His handsome but soft face drained of color. "They say he commands 10,000 pure-blooded warriors, Mother. That he drinks the blood of rogue alphas. It is unnerving." "Peasant gossip," Constance scoffed, though even she felt it. The ancient, oppressive magic of the Iron Mountains bearing down on her chest like a stone hand. "He summoned us personally for his mating ceremony. That is an honor. He has finally chosen a queen, some hulking warrior woman from the eastern steppes, no doubt. We will smile, we will flatter her, and we will secure our borders." Genevieve, pretty and arrogant, stroked the swell of her belly. "Perhaps the new queen will need guidance on bearing heirs. I hear the Ironblood women are so occupied with fighting they forget how to breed." Constance smirked. "Indeed, my dear, you are the perfect example of what a Luna should be. Fruitful and obedient, unlike the useless trash we finally disposed of." Rowan turned his face to the frost-covered window. Guilt flickered across his features at the mention of Adelaide. Brief, then buried. He had a strong mate now, a pup on the way. His conscience could rest. When the carriage rolled through the massive spiked iron gates of the citadel, the sheer scale of the Ironblood stronghold struck them mute. Thousands of elite guards lined the battlements above. The air hung thick with roasted meat, rare spices, and the intoxicating, dangerous musk of an apex predator pack on the edge of celebration. Beta Silas stood waiting in the courtyard, draped in dark leathers and a heavy wolf pelt. His expression, carved granite. Alpha Rohn, Dowager Constance, Lady Genevieve. Silas greeted them without a trace of warmth. You are expected in the great hall. The king holds court before the moon rises. Constance descended from the carriage, chin lifted high. Thank you, Beta Silas. We bring magnificent gifts from Silver Moon territory to honor your new queen. I am certain the queen will find your presence unforgettable, Silas replied. Smooth. A dangerous glint passed through his eye, one that Constance, drowning in her own self-importance, failed entirely to catch. They were led through labyrinthine stone corridors. The heavy oak doors of the great hall swung wide, and the sight beyond stole the air from their lungs. The hall was a cathedral of wealth and military force. Tapestries of crushed velvet and woven gold draped the walls. Hundreds of alpha-ranked warriors, lords and ladies of the Iron Blood and their vassal territories stood in perfect, disciplined rows. And at the far end, seated upon a massive throne forged from obsidian and iron, King Gideon, a terrifying vision of absolute dominion. He wore midnight blue silk threaded with silver. A heavy crown of jagged iron rested on his raven-black hair. Those golden eyes, luminous, predatory, tracked every step of their approach. Constance, Rowan and Genevieve walked the length of the great aisle, the silence of the hall pressing against them like stone. They reached the base of the dais and bowed. Rise. Gideon's voice rolled through the chamber like distant thunder. Constance straightened, arranging her most polished, practiced smile. __quote _124 _____. Her hand swept gracefully toward Genevieve's belly. May your union prove as fruitful as my son's. Gideon did not smile. He leaned forward, resting his chin against his scarred knuckles. You speak of fruitfulness, Constance, a bold subject for a woman whose hands have never been clean of poison. The smile cracked at its edges. I do not understand, Your Grace. My queen, Gideon continued, his tone lethally quiet, requested your presence here personally. She wished to repay a debt. Rowan moved forward, jaw set. Your Grace, we come only to honor your queen. If we have caused any offense, you will meet her now. Gideon rose. His alpha aura detonated through the room like a shockwave, driving Rowan to his knees before the man could finish drawing breath. Genevieve gasped and clutched her stomach. Constance's knees knocked audibly together. Gideon turned and extended one hand toward the heavy velvet curtains behind the twin thrones. The curtains parted. The woman who stepped through them stopped every heartbeat in the room. She moved in a gown of spun silver that caught the torchlight like liquid moonlight pooling at her feet. A crown of woven winter roses and hammered iron rested against her golden hair. Her shoulders were drawn back. Her aura radiated a pure, blinding lunar power that pressed against Gideon's own dominance and did not yield. It was Adelaide. The hall held its silence like a held breath as she descended the 3 shallow steps and came to stand beside him. Gideon lifted her hand to his lips, his golden eyes never leaving her face. Rowan's jaw came apart. Every drop of color evacuated his skin, leaving him gray and waxen. He opened his mouth. Nothing came, only a strangled, choking sound, small and pathetic. Constance lurched backward, one hand slamming to her chest as though she had taken an arrow. 1, 3, 3, she breathed. Her eyes had gone wide with a terror that bordered on something fractured. Adelaide said, the voice that left her lips bore no resemblance to the soft, frightened whisper of the broken girl from Winterfell Keep. It was resonant, commanding, the voice of a queen who had already won. Genevieve, blind to all history in the room, looked between them with open confusion. Rowan could not answer. He was staring at Adelaide's neck, searching for the mating mark he had rejected, and finding nothing but flawless skin, soon to bear the claim of the most powerful alpha alive. Adelaide? Constance's voice fractured into something frantic. She forced out a laugh that sounded half hysterical. __quote _139 ___. A low growl tore from Gideon's throat, low and deeply, quietly terrifying. He snapped his fingers. Beta Silas stepped forward, unrolling a length of parchment. "The confession and ledger of the flesh peddler Morven," Silas read to the silent hall, "extracted prior to his execution. Quote, 30 pieces of silver paid to Dowager Constance of Silvermoon for the barren female Adelaide. Instructed to deliver her to the Grey Wastes or the Frostgate slave markets. Kept in wolfsbane iron upon Constance's strict orders." The gasps that broke across the gathered dignitaries were sharp and immediate. To sell a pack member was criminal. To sell a mated daughter to flesh peddlers was something without a name clean enough to speak aloud.
Silas unrolled a second sheet.
"The decree of annulment, signed by Alpha Rowan of Silvermoon, dated the night before the transaction. I had no knowledge of the slavers," Rowan cried out, his voice splintering. He turned to Adelaide, his eyes wide and begging. "Adelaide, please. I believed she was sending you to a cloister. I only wanted a pup. You were barren." "She was never barren, you sniveling coward." Gideon's roar shook the chandeliers in their iron rings. "She was poisoned." The word hung in the air like a blade suspended mid-swing. Nobody breathed. Gideon's gaze locked onto Constance, and his eyes burned with something beyond fury. Mother Beatrice, our chief healer, discovered traces of moonshade in her blood. A slow poison, administered daily, designed to smother her wolf and mimic barrenness. A poison you brewed, Constance. Genevieve shrieked. She stumbled backward from Constance and Rowan, face twisted in horror. "You poisoned her. You sold your own blood." And Constance knew. The trap had closed around her. The polished mask of the elegant dowager splintered apart, exposing the desperate, hideous creature underneath. She bared her teeth at Adelaide. She was nothing. A northern beggar without a dowry. She deserved less than nothing. "I did what was necessary to preserve the Silvermoon bloodline." And in doing so, Adelaide's voice came steady as a funeral drum as she stepped forward. "You annihilated it." Her gaze dropped to Rowan, still crumpled on the marble floor. "I loved you, Rowan. I swallowed every whisper, every cold silence, every cruel jab, because I believed we were mates. But you watched your mother shatter my soul and said nothing. Then you signed my life away for a string of Warhorses. You are no alpha. You are the memory of a man who never existed." She turned to Gideon. "My king, they kneel in your domain. Their fate belongs to you." Gideon descended from the dais. Each boot strike cracked against the marble like a war drum. He stopped before Constance. The dowager withered beneath him, trembling so violently her teeth rattled, crushed under the raw, suffocating pressure of his killing intent. "In the old days," Gideon said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I would have torn your throat out with my teeth, mounted your skull on the gates of the citadel as a lesson." Constance whimpered. Tears, real tears, born of genuine terror, carved rivers through the powder on her wrinkled face. "But my queen possesses a more poetic sense of justice." He let the silence stretch. "Death is too merciful for a woman who prizes status and comfort above her own daughter's life." Gideon turned to face the hall. "Here's a judgment of the Iron Blood. Rowan of Silvermoon, You are stripped of your alpha title. You are weak, treacherous, unfit to lead a single wolf. Your territory is annexed as a vassal state of the Ironblood Kingdom. Your warriors absorbed into our ranks. Your lands placed under the command of Beta Silas. Rowan wept openly, face buried in both hands. Everything he had betrayed Adelaide to claim, his title, his pride, his pack, dissolved in a single sentence. As for you, Constance. Gideon's voice sank to something darker than a whisper. You sold my mate for 30 pieces of silver to the Frostgate slave markets. So it is only fitting you taste the life you chose for her. Constance's eyes blew wide. No, no, please. I am highborn. I am a dowager Luna. You are nothing, Gideon corrected her without raising his voice. Guards, strip her silks, bind her wrists in iron, without wolfsbane. She has no wolf worth suppressing. She is banished to the rock quarries of the grey wastes. She will shatter stones in the freezing cold until the last breath leaves her miserable body. If she stops working, she does not eat. No! Constance screamed as two massive Ironblood warriors clamped down on her arms. Rowan, help me! Genevieve! Rowan never lifted his head. Genevieve turned away in open disgust. Constance was hauled from the great hall, kicking and shrieking, her frantic wails echoing down the long stone corridors, growing fainter, until there was only silence. Gideon's attention shifted to Genevieve. She stood trembling, hands pressed against her swollen belly. Lady Genevieve of House Sterling, you were a pawn in Constance's scheme. You carry a pup, and the Ironblood do not punish the innocent. You may return to the river pack with your dowry intact. Or, he gestured toward Rowan with undisguised contempt, remain with this Omega and live as a commoner in my lands. Choose. Genevieve stared at Rowan, a man hollowed out, titleless, wealthless, stripped of every scrap of dignity he ever possessed. She spat on the marble beside him. I am a daughter of House Sterling. I will not raise my child beside a coward. She bowed, awkward, clumsy, toward Adelaide and Gideon. Thank you, Your Grace. I will return to my father. Rowan remained alone on the cold floor, a shattered, pathetic thing. At a sharp nod from Silas, guards dragged him upright and hauled him toward the servants' quarters, where he would spend his remaining days mucking stables for the wolves he once believed himself better than. The heavy doors of the great hall groaned shut, the stench of betrayal lifted. In its place, the scent of pine, winter air, and the electric hum of a ceremony still waiting to begin. Gideon turned back to Adelaide. That cold, ruthless king dissolved, and only the devoted maid remained. His fingers found her jaw, tracing its line with impossible gentleness. __, quote _ 145 __. The words came quiet, almost fragile. Adelaide drew a long breath. That heavy, suffocating darkness she'd carried for 3 years, gone. Every ghost haunting Winterfell Keep had been put to rest. She gazed into Gideon's golden eyes. Adoration burned there, fierce, absolute protection. __, quote _146 __. Her smile broke wide and true, radiant enough to make Phelan purr deep inside her chest. __, quote _147 __. Gideon's gaze darkened with hunger. He swept her into his arms without effort, carried her back up the steps to the center of the dais. Above them, silver moonlight pierced the stained glass windows, drenching them both in ethereal glow. Before the assembled might of the Ironblood Kingdom, Gideon bared his throat to her. Adelaide leaned close. Her fangs descended. She bit deep into the juncture of his shoulder, claiming her king. Gideon's roar shook the rafters, pure triumph. He claimed her in return, the bond locked into place like a key turning in a lock forged before time. Golden, intoxicating magic braiding their souls together for eternity. The great hall shattered into howls, thousands of wolves, voices rising as one, welcoming their new Luna, their queen who had walked through hellfire and emerged forged in iron. 4 months later, the iron citadel hummed with life. Spring had shattered the frost at last. Wildflowers rioted through the royal gardens. Adelaide sat in a sunlit courtyard, Gideon's heavy head resting in her lap. He dozed, spent from a morning drilling his generals. She smiled, threading her fingers through his raven hair. Her other hand rested over the gentle swell of her stomach. The barren northern bride carried the heir to the Ironblood throne. Mother Beatrice had confirmed it with barely contained joy. 2 strong heartbeats, not 1, 2. She had lost a false family. And the moon goddess had answered with the greatest kingdom and the fiercest love imaginable. Adelaide's path, from discarded broken wife to revered queen of the Ironblood kingdom, stands as proof of what resilience and fated destiny can forge. Stripped of dignity, poisoned by those sworn to protect her, she could have surrendered to the freezing misery of slave cages. But the darkest betrayals become the crucible where true strength is born. Gideon, a king feared by every living soul, looked past rusted iron and false labels. He saw the unbroken spirit of his equal. Constance and Rowan's treachery became the very blade that carved their own destruction. Karma, guided by the moon goddess, does not miss. Adelaide found justice. She found a kingdom. And she found a love that healed the scars no one else could see, proving that the most magnificent reigns are born where the deepest sorrows end.